I don't normally do a forward to these discussions, but there is a point of this discussion more towards the end where I think I make a complete hash of the idea of freedom from and freedom to. I want to try and clarify this without using those terms. The feeling is that in the US and in some other countries, it's not just a US problem, there's a lot of focus on individualism and people standing up for themselves and not acting collectively. And my feeling is, and people can feel free to disagree with this, but some things are better dealt with collectively. And one of the things that we mention later on in the discussion is climate change, action on climate change. It's much better, in my view, for governments to take the stance that we're going to act on climate change than it is for individuals to do so. And that follows through into lots of other things. Being willing to pay a bit more tax so that you can have decent infrastructure for education and transport, etc., etc. Better healthcare, better mental health care, the ability to retire at some stage in the future. Sometimes you need to be willing to pay now for somebody else's retirement so that you can have a retirement in the future. To me, that's a no-brainer. Lots of people disagree with that idea, but that's what I was getting at there. In America, it seems to be too skewed towards the individual freedoms and not focusing on the fact that acting collectively, we can sometimes actually get greater freedom by acting together. Right, hi everyone, Morphy here. I'm pleased to have with me today Godless Cranium. And I was a big fan of your channel for a while, and then I got out of the habit of watching it because you had a bit of a long hiatus from making videos. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and why you did?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me on your show, by the way. The main reason was because of basically we had the COVID thing and things were up in the air, and I work in social services. So the people that I assist I guess my job takes some kind of I have to have some kind of emotional capital left. And with COVID going on and a lot of the upheaval in the atheist community, as well as I guess a part of my disillusionment over the movement, it just kind of sucked the energy out of me, and I just didn't want to do that. And I also didn't want to go to work half baked and not able to assist my clients with what they needed me to do my job properly. So they come first, and so I decided that I was gonna take. I didn't mean it to be quite that long, but I don't know if you've ever made videos, but sometimes when you stop making videos for a week or two, then you start to make excuses for not making videos if you're not totally into it, which I wasn't.
It's easy to do that with anything, isn't it? You know, if you don't exercise for a week, it's then easy to say.
That's funny because I was just about to use that example. It's kind of like that, yeah. Where you're like, I'll just go tomorrow, and then you tomorrow comes, and you just don't go, and it turns into a week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned there that you were disillusioned with the atheist community. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't want to go into person to person, but I just find that I guess when I first started YouTube, I was really pumped about atheist activism, and I wanted to do it in such a way that it wasn't super offensive to religious people, and I wanted to open a conversation and all that. But as time went by, I just noticed a lot of really bad elements within the atheist community. And I'm not saying that all of the atheist community is bad, obviously. But so from here on out, if I say atheist community, I'm talking in general, not specifically about everybody in that group. But there's a lot of anti-trans sentiment, which really came out around the Rationality Rules video, which I'm not at all on board with, and I think is really gross. there's that. There's a lot of anti-humanism within the community, which we're seeing now kind of play out on Twitter with the Atheist Secular Alliance, I think it's called, or something like that. I don't know. One of the bigger atheist organizations that just used an ableist slur and then defended it by calling Godless Cranium, Godless Engineer's wife, Caitlin, a cunt. And you just see it everywhere where they're just that also irresponsibly platforming white supremacists, for example. Those kinds of things I don't want to be a part of. And so and it's really hard to speak out against it because, like I said, it's just draining emotionally and mentally, because you're constantly meeting walls, and people either shun you or either protect them, they shun them, or they just ignore it and pretend it'll go away, right? But it's not going to go away. It's been there for years and years. It's been happening. The atheist community for 10 years before the recent crop of atheist activists like myself we're pumping out anti-feminist, basically anti-humanist material for a long time. So it's no surprise to me. I should have realized it earlier, but it was no surprise to me to, once I sat down and thought about it, that there's just a lot of toxicity within the movement. And I also had to re-examine a lot of that time that I was off. I was kind of re-examining also where I wanted, what direction I wanted my channel to go in, because I don't want to make those kinds of people feel comfortable being my subs, if that makes sense. Yeah. I don't mind if they watch, because I want them to watch, right? But to watch so that they can get a different perspective. But also at the same time, I don't want them to feel like I'm somehow giving them permission, or I'm propping up that belief system, because I don't want that to be the case. So I've lost a lot of subs over it. A lot of support in the atheist community, but I feel like it's the right direction to go in, and I'm going to continue to do it no matter what, even if my channel dies out of it. So
yeah, you said on one of the videos that you or one of your return videos that you want to take the channel in a different direction and deal with more humanism rather than atheism.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm probably going to start maybe critiquing atheist activists in the community that are, I find harmful. So yeah, there's going to be a little bit of that. I do like the some of the videos I made on why beliefs matter, the when to go and things like that, because they're really interesting to research, and it's pretty cool, I think. But yeah, I still haven't really kind of settled on where I want the channel to go in, but I definitely know in what direction I don't want it to go in. And so I'm not going to be, I'm going to put out less atheist content, I suppose. Although there might be elements of atheism, like the last one I put out with Will Smith. There's an element of atheism in there, but I also included in that video that I didn't want to beat up on religious people in any way, that it wasn't, obviously all religious people. It's just this stereotype it's not just in regular, it's in movies, it's everywhere, that if you're not a God-fearing person, then you're just not moral or something, or ethical. So yeah,
I see this a lot in TV shows where people are trying to convince somebody that they're a good person, and they say, I go to church. Yeah
And you see it in interviews and news and everything. You see somebody does something terrible, say there's a serial killer, and then they go ask the neighbors, and the neighbors go, oh well, they went to church every Sunday, so it's unbelievable that they were bad, right? And you're like, yeah. Yeah, that really doesn't mean anything, right?
That's right. I actually want to come on to Will Smith in a moment. I do like to often start. We started on a note that isn't funny, but I like to start on a funny note. And if this goes into podcast form, please bear in mind this is not going to take a long time. I sent you some pictures from the Where's Wally COVID edition. Yeah. And I was just wondering if in those photos you could spot Wally.
Yeah, suddenly Wally becomes not a fun game anymore.
Yeah, so yeah, he's standing all on his own on a beach and standing all on his own at an intersection.
Yeah.
pretty easy to find. When I come across things like that, it just makes me laugh. I always take a copy of any pictures like that I come across, because they're quite often little good talking points in different things.
Right.
But so the Will Smith video, I think we could almost make several videos out of this one. Your video is very succinct and quick on all the points, but I had no idea until I saw this that Will Smith was such a deluded individual.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, to be honest, until I saw that clip, and I was like, "What?"
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. There's a few things that you hit on here. I didn't know much about these religious boarding schools.
Yeah.
So can you talk about what happened with those?
Well, I don't know as much about the boarding schools as I know about the ones in Canada, me being Canadian. But they're very similar. They were basically religious schools. In Canada, they were set up by the state, but they were run by religious institutions. Mostly, I can't remember which one. I have a video on it actually, which I guess I can send you the link for after the thing. It won't do your audience any good, but there is that. But there's so they were run by religious institutions. I assume that it's kind of the same thing in the States. As you saw in the video, there was pictures of nuns and stuff. And what they did was they wanted to get the quote savage out of. So they basically wanted to Christianize the indigenous people. So what they would do is they would take their children away, and they would put them in these schools, and they would cut their hair against their customs. They would dress them the same as what they thought that Christians should dress as. They would not let them practice their language or learn any of their culture. Basically a cultural genocide. Not basically, it was a cultural genocide. So yeah, that's what they did, and it's terrible. And then of course that caused huge harm to the indigenous population, which continues today, because later I believe in Canada, I'm going to do a video on it eventually, I think, but there's a thing called the 60s scoop. So basically what they did was they sent these kids, which they had abused in these boarding schools. And in Canada, at least, the boarding schools didn't close until like the 90s. So it's not like it was like ancient history or anything. It's like it's pretty new, right? And they would send these kids back, and they would be damaged emotionally, and they'd be from trauma, and then they would come and take their kids, right? Because they said they were unfit parents. So there's so much in the indigenous community that's directly caused by I guess colonialism or us, which is just terrible. And I kind of I've always, for the last couple of years anyways, I've always kind of wanted to shine a little bit of a spotlight on, because I think they often get left out of the conversation. We tend to focus on, at least right now, on BLM and stuff, which is great. I support that as well. But we also tend to forget, especially in Canada as well, they are treated really badly. So, yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, how this ties to the Will Smith video, obviously, was he was saying that all leaders should be religious. And funnily enough, I was just talking about that type of thing yesterday with Vila Bianca. And you'd think that actually people would want to vote for atheists, because we actually want to, or at least humanists, because we actually want to make the world better now, rather than thinking this is just some sort of, audition for the afterlife. So, having religious leaders to me is a completely, especially if they're the type that, there's no point in doing anything because we're going to be raptured anytime soon. It's completely crazy.
Well, there's I guess I guess this kind of ties back into what we were talking about at the beginning is, if you would have asked me that in like 3 years ago, I might have said, we should, spend more time maybe voting for atheists. But I'm not so sure anymore, because they have their own blind spots that are often brought on by their own kind of weird ideology, where they kind of discount feelings and say that they're not that worthy, and and use like facts and logic, but it's like pseudo facts and pseudoscience, and things that are demonstrably harmful to people, and especially in minority communities like the trans community. So I'm not so sure that anymore that it would make much of a difference. I think we should just maybe vote for people that aren't monsters and aren't pushing harmful things. But yeah, I mean, there are obviously in some religious communities, there's some harmful doctrines that are terrible, and I believe like it's statistically wise, anyways. Atheists tend to be more progressive as far as towards the LGBT community and things like that. So yeah, I think there's definitely there's a lot of really bad religious people out there as well. I mean, Ted Cruz. I don't know if you think Trump is religious, but I'm not so sure he is. But he definitely uses religion, and if it wasn't for his religious base, he wouldn't be in power. So.
Yeah, I was going to come on to him. Another point that you made was the war in Iraq and the fact that it was Bush was certainly inciting religious sort of talk when they went into that.
Yeah.
And then the point that you've just sort of raised was the access to the White House of evangelicals. So you had that thing in the video where there was a load of them surrounding Trump and praying and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You've got Paula White, people like that. How do you feel about all those sort of people having access directly to Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, the thing I said this on Twitter that the one thing that really after I made that video, that one clip kind of kept coming back to me. Like I kept thinking about it, and it was just his smug look, like the way like they had their hands on him and they were praying and telling him how great he was. He was like a defender of freedom and all this. And I tried to mitigate that by putting up things that were counter to that, because he's not for freedom. Obviously, he wanted to. One example I used in the video was he wanted to put people in jail for burning the flag, which is definitely anti-freedom. But the smug look on his face and the way that he just loved being told how great he was, that look just kept like haunting me for the rest of the day. He's a terrible human being. I've said for a long time before it was popular, I guess, to say it, that he's a fascist. And I tend not to use labels like fascist or racist as a like common. It's after I see like a pattern of behavior, and I started putting out the with Cyrus the Skeptic. We did Cycles of Fascism video series, and it was kind of to try to point out that America's kind of moving towards a fascist state. So we've been kind of borne out to be correct in the last couple of months anyways. So
yeah, I think that's true. I've mentioned it on a few of my talks. I had Dr. Clint Haycock on from the Mindshift podcast. I don't know if that's a podcast you've listened to.
No.
A couple of months ago, and he was talking about the Seven Mountains theology and Christian dominionism and this sort of stuff, which I've looked into a lot lately. And this whole Trump administration, the way it's going, appointing right-wing judges and all this sort of stuff, is very much something they've been aiming for since back in the sort of 50s and 60s. And to have a vice president like Pence with the sort of beliefs, anti-science beliefs that he has, the fact that he was put in charge of the coronavirus response is probably a big factor in the fact that so many people have got it in the US.
Yeah, the US has handled it terribly, because I think it's not just about religious belief that's been handled that way. I think it's kind of like the system in the States, as far as like the way they think of capitalism there. I was critical of the Canadian government because they took about a week to say, hey, we should maybe give people $2,000 a month so that they can pay their rent and stuff. And they were working on like helping out businesses at that time. So I think that's completely backwards. It should be the other way around. It should be looking at helping the people that are least able to look after themselves first, and then look after, rich people. But in the States, it's like 1,000 times worse, because they rolled out $1 trillion bailouts for the rich, and I think they've gotten $1,200 check. So I think that's that's a huge failing. And obviously, the people that are most affected by COVID are going to be the poor and the homeless who can't go. They don't have a way to isolate. They don't have a way to wash their hands regularly, like every few hours or whatever that you're supposed to do it. They don't have access to masks or PPE or any of that. So so that's the States is terrible for that. They've Trump is definitely responsible for thousands and thousands of deaths. I think I don't know how many deaths they've had now, but it was over 130,000 last time I looked. So
yeah, it definitely is above that. That's for sure. The speaking about that, bailouts going to the wrong people. You also mentioned about the Catholic Church has been getting some of this taxpayer money. It's not just what they're using it for. It's the fact that the churches are organizations that don't pay tax and then are receiving taxpayer money.
That's like one kick, and then the second kick is they're using it to pay off the fines they got for sexually abusing children. So it's a double kick in the nuts, I guess.
Yeah. So far, Will's been wrong on quite a number of points, hasn't he?
Yeah. I think maybe Will should stick to acting. And by the way, I there's like this thing about like I noticed in the comment section of my video where there was like a lot of people that were like, "Well, I hate Will now" and stuff. And I don't hate Will. I just think that's a stereotype that he's kind of bought into, and we should be opposing it and ending it. But also on the flip side, I try it's kind of a sticky line. Like there's like that big thing on like Twitter and stuff, like there's a big conversation about people like J.K. Rowling. Should we be buying her books, for example, since she's putting out harmful stuff? And with Will Smith, I don't think that his comments will color my subconscious viewing of his videos. Like I think I'll be able to watch whatever video movie he puts out next and be like, yeah, that's a good movie or whatever. Maybe with J.K. Rowling, maybe not. I've never been a big Harry Potter fan though, so it doesn't really affect me. But if it was somebody that I really, really liked, and they were putting out the amount of just vile, putrid hatred that she does, it might even though I don't want it to affect how I view her art or their art, I'm not so sure it would like subconsciously. I think it would in the background kind of just taint whatever it is that I'm watching. You know what I mean? So. Although I don't think that should be the case, I think we should be able to separate the art from the person. But sometimes I find that kind of hard to do. So, to be honest.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult. I'm just thinking here in Australia we had the situation with Rolf Harris when his various abuse things came out and people started taking down his art and things like that. Mm-hmm. How far do you go with these things? I mean, I agree with you about Will Smith. He's it's not going to stop me watching Men in Black.
Yeah, I think it doesn't reach the threshold for me for terrible person. I guess. I think he's just wrong.
Yeah, what he really needs is to have his eyes open a little bit and maybe hear a bit of the other side of the argument and so on.
Yeah, if he would have just said, hey, maybe we shouldn't elect unempathetic people, then I'd be on board with that. I'd be like, yes, Will, you're right. Or just the love part, even though I find that kind of like a nebulous statement, oh, we should need love. But according to Pence, maybe love would include taking, LGBT rights away because that's bad for the country, according to him, right? So it's kind of a weird statement. That was one of my biggest criticisms in the video, actually, was that he takes complex issues, right, and then just boils them down to wow, he doesn't believe in God, so that's the problem, or he doesn't have love, so that's the problem. But that's not the problem, right? The problem is so much more complex than that. There's a whole system of problems that all kind of converge to make Trump, right? So
yeah, just going along those lines, we had our plebiscite on marriage equality back in 2017 here in Australia. And what happened was that most of the objections, as you can imagine, were from right-wing Christian types. I'm not saying they're the only ones, but a lot of the objections were were religious, and society was going to fall apart. Well, guess what? 3 years on, and all the harmful things they said were going to happen to society have not.
Yeah, it's like it's like all of those same kinds of things, right? Like the bathroom debate, the trans sports debate, right? Like, is sports falling apart? No, it's not. It's like all of those things, right? It's just a way of trying to block progress, right? So it's like, well, we need to do this to block these people, and they're always minorities that have a hard time standing up for themselves because they don't have the numbers, and we live in a society that for a long time demonized, in that case, in your case there, demonized gay marriage. So even if you're an atheist, that culture of like bias gets baked in there, right? So that's how it is. It's how like systemic racism is, right? Like it's baked into the culture, into the systems, right? So that doesn't mean every person is going to be anti-gay or anti-gay marriage or racist, but it does boost the probability that there's going to be racist people and anti-gay people, right? So
yeah. So just finishing off with Will Smith, the last part where he was talking about the government spraying cold germs and AIDS was the result of weaponizing viruses and so on. And what got me was it sort of went against the motif of his whole thing, because surely this was happening under the Bush administration and so on. So these God-fearing presidents, all this stuff was going on under their watch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I left that in because of the look that Barbara Walters gives them at the end. So, Barbara Walters, like, oh, Will, I love that part. And I was like, that's going to be the ending of the video because that's like perfect. But right before that starts, like that whole part that I left in there, it's a really odd interview because he says to her, like, oh, you're attracted to me, right? I'm used to it. I'm like, what? like who says that in an interview, right? But yeah, Will Smith has said he's a conspiracy theorist, and I think at some point, like after that interview, maybe his like publicist told him to like just be quiet because that's not good for his image, and because he hasn't really said anything like that since, that I could find anyways, publicly. So, but I do know that I think it's his son is also a pretty conspiracy theorist. But I didn't put that in there because it had nothing to do with Will. So, I mean, besides that, Will might have passed that on, like through culture and stuff, like talking about it in house or whatever. But it's a really odd interview.
Yes. I love that look on the face. I think the classic example was when Bill O'Reilly said to David Silverman, tie goes in, tie goes out. And you said that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Yeah.
It's quite a well-known one.
I've seen that one.
It's the same look.
Yeah, I saw that one for sure. I almost wanted to zoom, like it happened so quickly though that she goes, oh, Will, that I didn't have time to zoom it in without doing it like super obvious. Like, but if I could have done like, if it would have gone slower, I could have like close zoomed in. That would have been amazing. But
So another one of your recent videos that I watched was one about cancel culture, and I think that all of the cases that you dealt with in that video, you had a slam dunk. You were absolutely right about those. But your general views on cancel culture seem to be at variance with the views of people like Seth Andrews and Sam Harris, who think that there are elements on the left where there's no room for nuanced debate and they just wait to get outraged about things. So how do you feel about that?
Well, like I said in that video, there would have to be some examples given because that's kind of a nebulous thing, right? Like, well, there's just no nuanced debate. Okay, well, what subject is there no nuanced debate about? Because a lot of times when people say that, they're talking about things like race realism and, other crappy racist garbage that, or like the anti-trans debates, things like that. So, so of course there's going to be pushback on those things because you're actively starting to harm a minority community, and a lot of times they're doing it irresponsibly because they don't know what they're talking about. And on top of that, they're kind of discounting the feelings of that community by, pushing this stuff out on these huge platforms that, and then, like I said in that video, there's people that are getting harmed by, or possibly harmed from those kinds of ideas and stuff, and they don't even know why they're being harmed. But it could be because somebody watched a shitty video by some YouTuber in his underwear, in his thing, sounding all rational, that pushed some pseudoscientific nonsense out there. So I guess it would depend on what you mean by that. But definitely, if you're talking about cancel culture, there's way more of a cancel culture on the right. I mean, they've been canceling things since forever, right? I mean, you can go right back to, like, before the D&D canceling, when they were trying to cancel D&D for being satanic. You can go now where they tried to, they were burning merchandise from companies they didn't like. Right-wing things talking about, like, commercials that are bad, like the big commercial that was basically like, hey guys, let's just be good people. There's cancel culture about how, like, what movies are bad because they're feminist. Captain Marvel, for example, there's large platforms have made 20 videos on that one subject. So if we're talking about cancel culture, I don't think it's on the left that you'd have to worry about it. Now, is there going to be, like, some people that are get a little bit too crazy about it? Then yeah, sure, okay. But is it a problem? I guess what I mean is it a systemic problem, right? Like, is it a systemic problem on the left? Because, like, Sam Harris, for example, gets criticized and he doesn't like it. He's not being canceled. He's got a huge platform. He's got lots of money. He sells books. He gets paid attention to on Twitter and other places. So, I mean, he's not being canceled. He's just a baby and he can't handle being criticized. And he puts out some really horrible things, like when he, like, sat there and laughed with Douglas Murray when he went on his anti-trans tirade. So he kind of deserves it. He deserves a lot of criticism and he doesn't like it. So that's too bad. I don't know what Seth Andrews has said, so you've lost me there.
Yeah, Seth Andrews was just talking about just generally not being able to have nuanced conversations was what he was saying. He didn't mention any specific cases. I do have.
That's what I mean.
I do have a specific case though, and it was my own experience. A tweet that I sent out under my actual who I am, not under the morph persona.
Right.
But it was just somebody had tweeted something about, they were never going to vote for anybody unless it was a woman. And, just that day it got my head up and I said, I think we should just vote for the best candidate. It doesn't matter whether it's a male or a female, what their sexuality is, what their race is. We should just be going for the most qualified person for the job, which I thought was a perfectly fair thing to say. But not according to the 1,000 replies I got back, which was, started off with, why would the woman not be the best candidate for the job? Well, she might be. That's exactly what I just said. She might be, but she's not going to be just because she's a woman. And, well, it depends on the job, I guess. I mean, there are some jobs, I guess, that are some roles that are more gender specific. But, I mean, we're going to come onto that a little bit with your views on debate shortly. But I got this huge tirade, and I was really lucky that actually a few other people, stepped in and said, read the original tweet instead of piling onto the reply to the retweet. Yeah. And it died down after a couple of days, but it was the most replies I've ever got to anything I tweeted. And I felt that I was being a victim of outrage that I hadn't actually instigated.
Yeah. Well, I think, like, I don't know, there's kind of a couple of ways you could come at that, right? Like, I think what you said is, coming from a good place. Like, I don't think when you said it, you're probably not being, trying to be racist or sexist, I mean. But on the flip side, I can see why some people might get upset with it. Not because you should be just, I mean, I don't think you should just vote for any candidate just because of whatever sex they are. But at the same time, right now, in most of the countries that we're talking about, like say Canada, Australia, US, it is dominated by old white guys, right? So, and can you tell me that, Trump is the best candidate? Probably not, right? Are there lots of women out there that would make better candidates? Yeah, right. In fact, Hillary was one. So
Michelle Obama would be a great candidate.
There's tons of women. I mean, it's embarrassing that Biden and Trump right now are the best that supposedly the best that the system can come up with, right? I mean, I'd vote for a wet shitty bag over Trump, but I mean Biden isn't super progressive either. So should you have got piled on? Probably not. That's the kind of the nature of Twitter too. Like Twitter's kind of like, it's easier to get worked up on Twitter than it is because it limits your it's kind of like geared towards outrage, you know what I mean? Because when you end up having to make either like huge tweet strings to get some kind of nuance out of it, and even then some is lost. So I think that's more a function of the thing. Like if you would have had one of those people on your show, just like, for example, and talked to them about it, it probably would have been a lot different experience for you. But I can kind of see why women especially would want to have more women representation. Because they're voting on things like abortion rights and women's issues, and there's 9 men in the room and no women, or 9 and 1 woman or something. So I can kind of see why they would go that way, right? But I think there's probably a better way of going about it. But Twitter isn't the place that you want to have that conversation, anyways, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I certainly think there should be a lot more balance in the representation that we have.
Mm-hmm. And the only way to get that would be to vote more women in, right? Or vote more minorities in, right? That's the only way you get to that conclusion, which is probably what they're saying, right? Like, well, we have to vote more women in because this is unconscionable, this is happening. So, and then there's like, there's lots of people that are like, well, men are just as good at making decisions about women's bodies as women. But I honestly don't think that's the case, right? I mean, like, that's just, look at how long the U.S. has struggled with abortion, right? Like, I mean, it's terrible. So, yeah. So, I mean, and part of that has to do with religion as well. So, like I said, it's like it's a nuanced topic that I understand. Like, I understand why women would think like that. And I understand why somebody like yourself would say, let's just vote for the best candidate, because that's obviously what you want to do. But in a good case scenario, there would be way more women running. They would be supported. There would be like women candidates that you could choose from. Right now, there's not as many. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think we see this further down in education system. For example, you get a lot of girls not doing science subjects because they get this sort of girls can't do science and this sort of stuff, and of course they can. It's completely ridiculous to say that, and I think that started to change. I think, for example, in biological sciences, there's now more women than men.
Yeah,
but these things do take time to change, and I think that sometimes people are just in a rush for it to happen tomorrow, rather than let's just make sure everybody's got equal opportunities, equally supported, and hopefully that's going to happen over a period of time.
Well, it's also like again, like kind of like YouTube is kind of like taking the nuance. Like you always, for a long time, you had a lot of the atheist channels banging on about the pay gap, for example, right? But just saying like women are in the workforce as much as men now doesn't take into account that, say, like in my profession, for example, social work isn't valued, right? Like it's not, you don't get paid a lot of money to do social work, right? Like you do social work only because you like that work, right? But say for my fiance has a university education, 4 years of university plus. So why isn't she getting paid more? Because it's considered a woman's job, right? And and I've been told that, like, on if I'm not using my face, just say, and I'm on a public forum, and somebody says, well, what do you do? And I say, well, I work in social services. I work with the deaf blind. And they say, oh, so you're a woman then. So, yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of nuance there that people, don't always think about. You could get the same amount of education and get paid a lot more for a job that's probably, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's obviously not helping as many people as my fiance would help on a day-to-day basis. So, yeah. So.
Yeah, it is crazy that the jobs that are actually the most important in society don't seem to be the ones that attract the salaries in many ways.
Yeah, well, you're seeing that now with COVID, right? Like, oh well, thank you to the people that are bagging my groceries, that are working and risking their lives for minimum wage, right? Oh, but they should have to do that, and they shouldn't get any more. I mean, stop putting up signs saying thank you to those people and just pay them more. At least pay them
Yeah,
enough that they can live on, right?
yeah, I think that's right. And it's interesting, coming back to Sam Harris, one really good thing he said recently was, he has people who, come in and do jobs for him. He has staff, shall we say, and he's just continued to pay them, even though they're not coming in and doing their jobs, because he's saying, well, he's still got the money to pay them. He doesn't want to come do the job because of the risk of infection and so on.
Yeah.
But he feels that he should just continue to employ them. And then you've got somebody like Harvard University who are sitting on ridiculous numbers of billions, who basically laid off without pay their canteen workers and things like that. It's crazy. If you've got the deep pockets to be able to continue to pay these people, pay them.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, Sam would have been paying them more all the way. They would have had a nice nest egg to be able to get by up till now. But yeah, I mean, that's better than a lot of employers. So good for Sam on that, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with him on that. And there's a few other people who have said to him that they're doing exactly the same thing. So
yeah, that's good.
That is good.
I mean, nobody should. I mean, nobody should have to go hungry or go without shelter or go without medicine or healthcare during a pandemic, right? It wasn't like they could plan for that, right? I mean, it took everybody by surprise, even though it shouldn't have, really, because it's a pretty ongoing thing, right? Like, we know that pandemics are a thing, but that's a whole other subject. But nobody should have to suffer for that. I mean, nobody should have to suffer for that in normal circumstances, right? I mean, we shouldn't have homeless people living on the street across from houses that are empty, right? Like, it's unbelievable that happens in society. But
yeah, we're actually going to be hitting that in a tiny bit, because of something else that I picked up, something I learnt about from one of your videos. I hadn't read, and I read into it because it interested me so much. But if we could hit something else first, and then come to that, back to that point, it would be a good one.
Sure.
Your view on debates, particularly things like modern day debates. And you picked out the Sargon versus Branton, who were, we've mentioned trans athletes and things like that so far, and they were debating that, where it seems that neither of them is really qualified or in any sort of position to talk about it. It just seemed like a crazy lineup for a debate on that. Yeah,
well, I'm kind of hesitating on making it, but because I know that it's going to get me into a lot of trouble, but I'm planning,
I'll just go for it.
No, I'm planning on making a video about responsible platforming, which is see, a lot of people have got on me because they think that I say you can't have those discussions, which isn't true. I just think you have to be responsible when you're having those discussions, right? So that means if you really want to learn about trans athletes, then you should have a trans athlete on, or a medical professional that can do it, not Sargon, who has gone his entire career on YouTube banging on women and telling them that he wouldn't even rape them, right? Like, he's no authority on that subject. He shouldn't even be in the discussion, right? Now, if you had if modern day debates had on an expert in the field, then I'd be like, yeah, that's a good topic, because now we can clear up some of the nonsense that's out there. But it's not really about, like, a lot of these white, not just modern day debates, but Non Sequitur Show, when it was around, and others, are really more about just getting viewership and getting people to come on for their trash fires. They're not interested in actually learning anything. They're just interested in getting eyeballs on their stuff. And it also kind of escalates, right? Like, the longer the channel is around, the more and more that they have to outdo their last trash debate. So it's kind of like, I don't know, that I forget that guy's name, the talk show host that used to do, like, they'd have people fight on stage and stuff, Jerry Springer or whatever, right? Like if you watch Jerry Springer when it first started, it was like a little bit edgy. but as it went on, right, it got worse and worse and worse because if you have like two people fighting on stage, now you need a family to fight on stage to outdo that, or you need more and more escalation of that, right? And that's what these kind of platforms are doing. And also like just like responsible platforming also means not having people on, like, say if you have like, for example, like white nationalism, is it worth debating? Yeah, sure. I mean, it's pretty prevalent right now. So sure, but would I debate it? No, because I'm not an expert. And a lot of those people that are like race realists and stuff have spent years creating this pseudoscience nonsense that can easily catch you flat-footed, right? And it's also like a lot of debates, like I said in that video, aren't about facts, are about your charm and how fast you can think and on your feet and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's that. And also I wouldn't have like a white national, like if I ran a podcast, just say, and just say I was qualified to debate it, I wouldn't have them on and talk about some other subject, right? To humanize them and make them sound like, not humanize them, but make them sound like they're reasonable and rational, right? And then have my audience go, this white nationalist, they don't know he's a white nationalist, or they aren't sure, and they're like, this guy doesn't sound that bad. He looks kind of rational. Maybe I'll go check out his stuff, right? And that's how they get sucked into this other part, into their channels, and then slowly they get radicalized, right? If you're going to have a white nationalist on, then talk about the white nationalism, because that's the thing that is harmful, right? Don't have them on to talk about some nonsense topic. So that's that. And also, like, if it's a dead ideology, then I probably wouldn't have them on. Like for example, if what's a good one? Like, what's that Western Baptist Church or whatever, the ones that used
Westboro Baptist Church.
There you go. Yeah, Westboro. Yeah. They used to be in the news all the time. So okay, have them on, right, and debate that. But would I have them on now? Probably not, right? And definitely not if I had like 100,000 subscribers or more, right? Like, so their ideology can infect part of my audience. I don't want that. Because they're not it's not worth it, right? Like they're just not prominent. they're not a danger right now, really. So I think we have to, especially with the advent of YouTube, where a lot of these channels have more subscribers and watch hours and watch time than mainstream media, we have to start like really thinking about why are we platforming these people? How do we platform them responsibly? And I think that discussion is just largely left alone, and it's largely left alone in the atheist community, because the atheist community is more about like, well, free speech, and let's just go talk about anything. It doesn't matter if you're pushing racist nonsense, right? Like, well, let's just go debate it. And they all think that they're qualified to debate stuff, but they're not, right? So it's part of the reason why I stopped doing Heathen Hour, because I didn't feel it was a productive use of my time, as far as like, I don't know, I didn't have any racists on, but just say I didn't want to, right? I didn't want to have that kind of dynamic going forward. So I think, we need to think about that. So I'm thinking of doing a video on it, but I know I'm going to have to go after another atheist content creator, which I've already done, which costs me big time. And it's, and like I said, it's just emotionally draining to get comment after comment after comment from atheist chuds that are like, wow, it's free speech and stuff. Or they just like like even on my debate one, where that debate video, I got a ton of well, if you don't want to debate, I'm going to unsubscribe. That's fine, whatever. Like, that isn't what I said. In nowhere in that video did I say don't have discussions or don't have debates. I'm pointing out this is not a responsible use of the debate platform, right? So.
Yeah, I think you're right about the expert thing. I mean, one of the things about channels like Modern Day Debate is they say dumpster fires are good for views.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they're going for, right? Like, Non Sequitur Show did the same thing, right? Like, they started out different, and then they started going into like flat earth stuff because it got views, right? It got people like, oh, let's go watch the creationists get owned. And okay, like, how many times can you do that? Then you start moving into other things. And what did they do? They started moving into white nationalist territory, right? Like, they had, and I have my own beef about McRae, who I think is a trash human. But they moved into having Jerry Epi or whatever on, and they would like give, well, not Kyle, but McRae was giving heart signals to him and stuff like that, right? Like that's how that's the progression, right? Like you end up having, flat earth stuff, which isn't super harmful, but then you start moving into things that are, right? So
yeah. All right. So we talked about that was a sort of digression in our discussion where you were talking about, people living on the streets directly opposite to empty housing and so on.
Yeah.
And the thing that you opened my eyes to was the Gini score.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't actually heard of that before.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know what that is, it's basically a coefficient that runs from 0 to 1, which describes how evenly distributed the wealth of a country is, basically. So if you had, myself and yourself, and we both got paid exactly the same amount, our Gini score would be sort of in the middle. Is that right? Or would it be a 0 in that case?
Yeah, so 0 would be for like perfect balance, right? Like so everybody would have the same amount.
Perfect balance.
Yeah.
So if you and I were a country and we both got paid exactly the same amount, we had the same wealth,
mm-hmm.
then our Gini score would be 0.
Yeah.
But if I received no pay whatsoever and you got everything, that would give us a Gini score of 1. So that's
right. Exactly
the most imbalanced it can be. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a coefficient that goes from 0 to 1, and being a mathematician, I like coefficients that go from 0 to 1. And it's one of the measures that you can use of the health of a society, isn't it? So
yeah.
the more imbalanced it is, the worse. And of course, the higher imbalances tend to happen in actually the poorest countries, which is interesting. So I had some figures here where you've got somewhere like Denmark, which we know people that live there have a very high satisfaction in their lives. We know it comes out well in most metrics that we use. And Denmark mm-hmm. has a Gini of 0.288, whereas somewhere like Haiti, where we know that, and you had video in your video of riots and things in Haiti, where it's 0.608. Now, this is a poor nation, and the wealth distribution is very imbalanced. And the USA, which is, from the figures I looked up, it was 0.49. I think that's a 2019 figure. But that's high for a country that's so wealthy, isn't it?
It's very high, yeah. I can't remember what the, from that video, but it was somewhere around either 5 or 6 that you're pretty much insured of having like unrest, right? Like revolts and stuff. And the States is like right on that borderline. I'm betting now that it would be over that number now that COVID's come and there's so many people unemployed and the rich are getting richer. Because the stock market is going up because rich people are still getting rich, right? But the rest of the people aren't. So I'm betting, and with and Trump's tax cuts and stuff. So I'm betting that now would be they'd be in the territory of revolts. And what do you see? Revolts, right? Like part of it. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with racial inequality and stuff, but it also has to do with, people getting, the poor people getting shafted during during COVID, right? Like they're the ones that are most likely to get sick. They're the ones most likely to die, and they're the ones that are being demanded to work, right? So it's a huge. To me, that the Gini coefficient is. And I'm no mathematician. I kind of don't like math, but it's definitely a good indicator of where you are. And in the world overall, the Gini coefficient is pretty bad. As I said in that video, it's like something like most of the wealth is owned by 8. It's like it would be like a Gini coefficient of 8 or something like that. And even in Haiti, where it's a poor country. There's in Haiti, there's rich enclaves that literally look down on 10 cities, right? Like it's on a hill. There's rich people all doing their thing, and they're all, and this hill is from the bottom of the hill down is just a big tent city. So I mean, it's terrible. And then you have people that are just they think that doesn't matter, right? They're like, well, one day they'll be rich too. But no, it's not how the world works. It's terrible.
Yeah, there's a real problem with this, and I can only see it getting worse, especially with the advent of things like AI, where less and less of the people could have more and more control over the means of production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if we don't do something to sort it out, you're going to end up with, as you say, rich people living in enclaves and everybody else in this sort of Mad Max type wilderness.
Yeah. Well, like I mean, in the States, for example, and even in Canada, for a lot of it, the wages have been stagnant since like 1950, right? Like I mean, it's really bad. Like you might be getting, say $20 an hour, but your buying power is the same as if you're making $7 an hour in 1950 or whatever it was, right? So it kind of like evens out that you're just not getting paid any more now than you were then. But the cost of living has gone up, so your buying power isn't nearly the same. So, I mean, I don't know. Like in my area, for example, like an average house here in my city is like $300,000 to $400,000, right? Like I remember my parents when they bought their house it was $79,000. So, and it's now worth $350,000 to $400,000. So, yeah, it's like it's even like an old house, right, is worth $200,000, right? So, or more, $250,000. So yeah, it's hard. You're making 50 grand a year, getting that house and getting a down payment and all that kind of stuff is becoming harder and harder and harder. So
Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, the Gini score, as I say, not heard of it before your video, and it's one to really keep an eye on, because it just seems to me that countries like Denmark and Sweden and Norway, where the Ginies are low, where people are happiest in general. So is it not something that we should just aim for? I've said on a number of these discussions that I could afford to pay an extra couple of percent tax if it meant that we could have things like perhaps even look at something like UBI, or certainly improve infrastructure, better public transport, and so on. All of these things could be done.
A lot of
and I would miss an extra couple of percent of tax.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of it too. Like a lot of the things that the right complains about, right? Like crime, and those kinds of things, right? It is directly related to being poor, right? So, like even this debate about the cops, right? Like look at this huge cop budget. That money could be going to services that actually help people on the ground, right? Instead of sending out a cop to go beat up a homeless person, we could be giving them housing, right? Like in the area that I live, we're working on getting, it's called Housing First, right? So it's getting homeless people into houses and then having somebody directly intervene and help them acclimate, right? Because once you're on the street for a certain amount of time, you start forgetting how to live in have shelter, you know what I mean? Like it's just not the norm for you anymore. So you need help, right? A lot of times, or like they might need addiction counseling. They might need help to get a job and all that kind of stuff, right? So that money would be way more spent there, and we'd have less dead people and less police violence if we had those people getting the help that they need, right? Because they're not criminals, they're poor. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely true. I think in any society that the people's socio-economic circumstances is a big factor in how much crime there is.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and upward mobility, right? Like are you able to, like a lot of times, like save the unemployment rate, right? Like they'll say, well, the unemployment rate's the lowest it's ever been. It's at 2%. Yeah, but they're all like shit jobs, right? Like they're all like jobs out. And I'm not saying working at Walmart's a shit job as far as like you're doing a job and if you like it, that's great. I'm saying it's a shit job as far as like what Walmart is doing to you, right? Like they're not paying you what you're worth, and they're, that kind of thing, right? So yeah, you might have a low unemployment rate, but if you're all making minimum wage, then that's not enough to live on. Like there's a lot of people that have 2-3 jobs, right? Especially if they're single and they don't have a second income, right? So it's just not the way to run things, I don't think.
There was a recent Seth Andrews podcast where he was talking about the way things are in America, and he was talking about, he said he's not sure he necessarily agrees with this, but he was reading an article and it was talking about freedom being split into freedom from and freedom to. And he said in the States we've gone too much towards freedom. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was towards freedom too. Freedom to do this, freedom to do that, freedom to do the other, and not enough freedom from. And things like being willing to contribute more in tax towards things like education and healthcare and things like that gives people more, freedom from problems that they encounter in society. They're going to get more educated populace. You're going to get healthcare for everybody, which I think should be universal in any developed country. And
in the States alone, like I said in that one video, there was an article that said something like climate change could be drastically changed by $300 billion. And you have 3 people in the States with $300 billion, right? So you could just take the wealth from those 3 people and you could mostly solve climate change. That's ridiculous, right? Like, there's no way that those people deserve that much money, right? Like, the thing is that a lot of times when they say like, well, I'll pay an extra 2% tax. Okay, like I get it, right? But you're making, I don't know how much you make, but just say, $70,000, $80,000 a year or whatever. So you're kind of basically just comfortably getting by, right? There's people with billions and billions of dollars, or billions and billions of dollars, right? And that number keeps going up, right? Like billionaires are going up and up. Tax those people, right? Like when I go into a store and I see like they go, well, UNICEF, or just say like, hey, do you want to do it? Like, okay, like, yeah, I'll give to UNICEF, but why isn't that multi-billion-dollar corporation giving to UNICEF, right? Like, why are they asking me for money? They have way more money than I have. So I think we need to be taxing the rich more and stop taxing the poor and middle class, right? Because we're already getting decimated. So
I think we need to make it clear here, because I'm thinking of some people, some right wingers who will be we're going to come on to one of those shortly, who would be listening to this and saying we're advocating for communism. Well, we're not. We're just advocating for a bit more fairness in the taxation system, so that money is distributed a bit more evenly. And we don't have, people coming back having, fought in wars and, suffering from PTSD, and then, they can't, they end up living on the streets, because there's loads of vets living on the streets and things like that. Mm-hmm. They should be coming back, getting proper healthcare, proper mental health care from what they've done, and it's got to be paid for. And perhaps rich people should be paying a bit more tax to pay for it.
Yeah, we treat like mental health like we treat the body, right? Like you're like sick, you go to the doctor. It's not a big deal, unless you live in the States, I guess. But in Canada, it isn't a big deal. Like if I get a cold tomorrow, I can go to the doctor and they'll give me some cold meds or something, right? But if I have a mental health issue, and I want to go see a psychiatrist, the free ones, or the ones that are paid by the state, basically, you'll be waiting a long time for that. So that is terrible. So you'll be struggling for months and months with very little to no help for your mental health issues, which are just as dangerous or hurtful as physical, ailments. So we do not pay enough attention to mental health at all, not even close.
Yeah. And it just makes sense, doesn't it, for those that can contribute the most? Wasn't this date right the way back to 18th century economics, that every tax should be proportional to the ability to pay it?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing though, is that like a lot of Americans are really scared of like the socialism or communism or whatever. Like they don't know anything about either one. No. And they're just like been scared their entire life of it because of the way it's talked about in the media and stuff, right? So I'm not a communist, but they definitely have some critiques of capitalism that are worth listening to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a communist by any stage, by any possible metric either. I just feel, like I say, at my level of income, I can afford to pay an extra couple of % tax. If you're Bill Gates' level of income, you can quite comfortably afford to pay a few more % than that. and it could solve many of the problems that we face. So, yeah, in America, it just seems to be lower taxes, lower taxes, lower taxes. And
well, it's always lower taxes for the rich. It's not lower taxes for middle income people or poor people. Well, poor people, maybe, I don't know. They don't have the money to kind of pay into the system. But I mean, the rich people are always getting when like COVID was like a perfect example of that, right? Like socialism's bad, and then all of a sudden, oh my god, COVID, let's give all the money to the companies, right? Like that's socialism for companies, right? but the regular people that don't have houses or don't have any like savings because they get paid so poorly every day, and they go to this job that they hate, they don't get any money, right? Like yeah, it's ridiculous. So
yeah, I think we're gonna come on to somebody now who perhaps would advocate completely the opposite, and well, let's just go for it. So I was talking to Neil the other day, and I was talking about the fact that why there's so many good, well-known Canadian atheists, and I just jotted down a few here. Vice Rhino, Paula Gia. When those guys release a video, it always goes to the top of my watch list, and you used to be on that list, but I got out of the habit when you stopped making videos for a while.
Get back in that habit.
I often watch Neil himself. I like Lilith. She's not big. She's not got a big following. They do Veritas Voices, and it's kind of like a podcast because they're not on screen or anything. So I often listen to that when I'm not actually watching something. And I mean, there's plenty of others that Neil mentioned. I don't want to just reel off a huge list, but with all of these good, well-known Canadian atheists, YouTubers, and so on, and podcast makers, is it all balanced out by the fact that Jordan Peterson is also Canadian?
Well, not just Jordan Peterson. There's Jordan Peterson, Steven Crowder, Lauren Southern, the other woman that was on the Rebel actually. Rebel News. I mean, there's a lot of J.S. Jerry Epi, who I said was a white nationalist. There is a lot of really shitty Canadians on YouTube. So, yeah, it definitely gets balanced. I'd say it's more balanced out because the thing about YouTube is it's like I often get accused of like, well, you're just going after this person because you want to get views or whatever. But if I wanted to get views, I would either continue to make anti-religious videos and feed into people's biases and say, yeah, you're right, there's no God, or do a right-wing grift and just say all this stuff like, women are terrible and minorities are terrible and you shouldn't be able to compete in sports if you're trans, and all that kind of stuff, because that's the stuff that gets views, right? Like that's the stuff that gets money. I'm doing it the opposite way. I was already a bad YouTuber before that, because I don't do all the things that a lot of YouTubers do. But I'm swimming upstream. Like there's no way that any left wing like you don't go, hey, let's make left content because I want to make money on YouTube. It's just not the way it works.
No. Vela Bianca was making that point yesterday. She was saying to me, how much money she could make if all of a sudden she decided that she was having a reconversion.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's way more skewed that way in that direction on YouTube, right? Like, I mean, you'd have to be crazy not to think so. But yeah, it's just I don't know. I find that that kind of the very few things kind of piss me off, but that kind of pisses me off because it's like, you think I'm doing that for money. Like you think I'm losing subscribers and burning myself out to make money that I'm not actually making. Like it's ridiculous. So yeah, I could just go set up a stage like Crowder and debate like college students or something that are unprepared for the debate and make more money, right?
Yeah, I was just Jordan Peterson popped into my focus again just the last couple of days because he was on a TV show called Q&A here in Australia, and he made some comments about climate change. Somebody asked him a question about climate change, because Jordan Peterson's all into individual responsibility for everything.
Right.
And the person simply asked him, well, they didn't simply ask him, they did insult him a bit, but but they simply asked him, did he not think that things like action on climate change were better done collectively rather than individuals being an individual responsibility? To me, her question is a slam dunk. Of course, you've got to get governments on board with this type of stuff.
Yeah.
But no, not as far as Peterson was concerned. And I mean, he's even, I sent you a tweet of his where he's even calling into question whether or not, climate change, carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere is even a bad thing and all this sort of stuff. I love the reply to it below. That's why I copied that one in. And it's saying, what's interesting, he's undoubtedly fully aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect, yet obviously feels it doesn't apply to him. Underneath, because I read down some of the comments, and it really polarizes people. And there's so many people saying, Peterson's absolutely right and all this sort of stuff. And to me, he was just absolutely wrong, as he is so often.
Yeah.
And, and a lot of people just think that if they agree with him, they're going to seem clever because he talks in such word salad all the time.
Yeah, it's funny that in his book, the one of his rules is to talk succinctly, right? Like, and he never does it. It's terrible. He's just not a good person. Like, yeah, Jordan Peterson's just a quack. He's he got famous lying about Bill C-16, right? Like, it's been out for I think 3 or 4 years now, and how many people have been arrested? Nobody. So. He lied about the bill, and even the Canadian bar at the time was like, no, you're not going to get arrested for using the wrong pronoun, silly. And so for some reason people believed Jordan Peterson, but they didn't believe all of the lawyers that are part of the Canadian Bar Association. Like, yeah, that's just, oh my God. Yeah. Jordan Peterson is, I mean, and what is he? He's eating a meat diet. I mean, against every doctor's advice, right? Like if you go into a doctor's office and say, hey, what do you think about me just eating salt and meat all the time? What do you think of that? They'd be like, you're going to kill yourself. Like, yeah, I don't know. Jordan Peterson's so special.
Yeah, people listen to him when he's talking so far out of his area of expertise as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just, he doesn't know anything about, like, he talks about like communism, for example. He doesn't know anything about it. He's even admitted, I think, at one point that he didn't even read. He's never read Marx, for example. So how can you talk so authoritatively about something you've never read? And yeah, he does that. He said so many. I mean, he's up there with Ben Shapiro, right? It's just saying the wackiest, weirdest stuff, but he says it in such a way that people are like, huh? Like, yeah, Jordan Peterson. Yeah,
I think one of my first introductions to him was the discussion he had with Sam Harris, and it was released as a podcast called What is Truth? I don't know. I mean, it's 2 hours of my life I'm not getting back, but
yeah, they did it again though, right? They did it twice.
They did it. They've done lots of them. They've talked lots of times, and
really?
to me, coming from I suppose I'm coming from my bias, but I always feel that Sam is making perfect sense and Jordan isn't making sense at all, and Sam's holding him to rights. But Jordan seems to have this huge following that no matter what he says, they think he's right.
Yeah.
And
well, that's what I said. It's kind of like the debate thing, right? Like, that's what I mean. Like, debates are less about being right and more about your charisma, how fast you can talk, how many, Gish Gallops you can do, how quickly you can think on your feet. And, a lot of times it's about like just seeming calm and rational, right? Like, if, I could be having a discussion with you and get rightfully upset at something you're saying, right? Like, just say you're like, yeah, something, racist, right? And I get upset by it, but I'm right. People there's going to be some percentage of people watching the show that are going to be like, GC lost his cool. Obviously, he's lost this debate, right? Like, even though, just because you talked calmly, it's ridiculous. So that's what I mean. Like, debates just aren't. I mean, most of the time. And a lot of people in that video also thought that, like, I meant like discussions, right? Like, I know I'm talking about debates in like a forum in front of a bunch of people, right? Like, me sitting in my living room debating it with my fiance isn't what I'm talking about, right? Like those discussions are fruitful to some degree, but usually when you're trying to measure how fruitful they are in front of an audience, it's, like Hitchens, for example, was super charming, right? Like and that's why he won a lot of debates, right? Not saying that what he was saying was wrong, but I'm saying even if he was saying stuff that was wrong, he's like witty enough that a lot of people would just come away thinking he won, right? So
he was great at using outrage in the right parts as well.
Yeah.
Cosmic Skeptic recently did a video on this where he showed that actually if you listen to what Hitchens said in a number of places, he was absolutely wrong, not answering the question. But like you say, because he was witty and charming and he had this ability to use outrage in exactly the right place, he often won debates even when the content of what he was saying. I've probably lost all my subscribers now, by the way, for saying anything anti-Hitch. But I mean, Hitch was a fantastic debater and did wonders for the atheist cause. But it was just pointing the finger just at that little bit that sometimes he didn't answer questions and use debate tactics to actually win those points.
Yeah, because like if you're in a debate and then like in front of a bunch of people and then somebody brings up something and that you're not sure of, right? Saying you're unsure means you're going to lose the debate, right? They even tell you that in like if you do a presentation, like they told me that in school, right? Like if I do a presentation in front of people and somebody brings up something, you either say something along the lines of I'll look into that or something, but you don't want to come off like you don't know what you're talking about, right? Because the people in the audience don't know that you don't know what you're talking about. As long as you keep pretending that you know what you're talking about, then you can do it, right? So it's the same in debates, right? Like you can just pretend that you know what you're talking about. And a lot of times, like there's also like a lot of like biases that we hold. Like for example, if you have a British accent, right? A lot of people are more likely to think that you're a serious intellectual, right? Like Cosmic Skeptic, for instance, right? So I mean, it's just like we're like a mishmash of biases. So those play out. I prefer watching. My watching. I very rarely watch debates. I did back in the day watch a lot of like Hitchens and stuff like that. But now I very rarely watch debates. I watch like videos that are like sourced that have video links that I can go look at after, and things like that. That's what I'm more interested in. So, and unfortunately, YouTube doesn't reward that, right? Like if I just start streaming all the time, put out 2 or 3 hour streams every day, then I'm going to get more subscribers than I would if I take a week or 2 weeks to make a video, right? So,
yeah, I guess that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
Yeah. A final point of what you were saying about debates. I watched one a few weeks back with Bart Ehrman against another biblical scholar called Daniel Wallace, somebody that often is quoted to me on Twitter because he says that Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John were written by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. I've done loads of videos about this, the fact that they weren't.
No.
And they were talking about they were debating how much you could trust the Gospels. And Bart Ehrman was just saying, he was explaining about how when you wanted a copy of a document, a scribe would write out the copy of the document, and they know that there's loads and loads of scribal errors because they've got multiple copies of the documents and they can look at them and see where mistakes were made and so on. But they don't have all of them, so they've no idea how much of the Gospels we have now are what was originally written. There's no way of knowing that. And he kept saying, I don't know. And Dan doesn't know either, even though he's going to say he does. And of course, Dan got up and said he knew exactly that they'd reconstructed the Gospels perfectly.
Right.
And he won the debate.
Yeah.
And it's like you say, because Bart Ehrman was saying he doesn't know, nobody knows. Yeah. And the other guy was saying, I do know.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Like, it's like admitting that you don't know something, especially if you're in a debate where you're expected to know what it is. Like if you're in a debate about climate change and you have no idea what you're talking about, but you've entered this debate where now you're viewed as being some sort of expert in that, right? Like, because the person that that is holding the debate has now put you on this platform saying, hey, this person's got something that we should listen to. Let's listen to it, right? It's basically, that goes back to the irresponsibly platforming people, right? So, yeah, so I don't know. But the debates are, to me, most of the time, I mean, not every single time. I mean, I like to hear debates. I'd like to hear discussions between two people that know what they're talking about. And I think in some cases those are valuable, but I'm talking in general, like 99% of the time, especially on YouTube, they're not worth your time really. They're just more for entertainment. That it's like junk food. It's like it tastes good, like I said in that video. It tastes good going down, but it's not really going to help your understanding of that topic anymore.
Yeah, completely agree. Anyway, we've been going for quite a while now, so being cognizant of your time and actually my time this morning, because I've got to go and do things now. Probably a good time to stop. But thanks so much for joining me. It's been a great talk.
Thank you for the invite.
And no, it's honestly, the pleasure is all mine. And I will send you a link to this as soon as I get it processed and out there.
Perfect. Thank you.